Okay, Greg, we're live. Thanks for joining me this morning. As I typically like to do, I'll give the floor to you to start off. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and a little bit high level background about who you are and what you've done in your career, and then about the company you've recently founded.
Sure. Thank you, Connor. I appreciate the time, and I hope the podcast continues to grow. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
I'm Greg Burton. I grew up on Long Island, New York, and went to Penn, then Stony Brook, and got my MBA from Long Island University. And the question is, how did I get into UBsports? And it's sort of a long, convoluted story, but it started off when I was about 12 or 13. I started getting into sports, and my parents, the best they could do is get me into Little League, and didn't enjoy baseball. Didn't enjoy the mainstream sports, although I tried them, and I was too short for basketball, too small for football, and so I found myself gravitating to the lower profile sports. I was playing tennis back before it was a big time sport. I started when I was 12. Also, I started fencing when I was 13. And that was just an accident. I was walking through my high school, and I saw, it was just before like school started, and I saw these guys wearing white outfits and masks and throwing swords around. And I said, wow, that's really cool. So I walked in and I asked, can I find out what this is about? And they said, this is fencing. And I said, that looks really cool. So I grabbed a sword, and it was like immediately an extension to my arm. And I realized I had an aptitude for it. And so I started doing that. And by the time I was in 11th grade, I was one of the top in New York State. When I was a senior, I was state champ in my league, and got basically offers to go to all the Ivy League schools, and ended up going to Penn. And unfortunately, I messed up my back in the first year I was there, and took me out of fencing. But I was a tennis player, and I was a sailor also. So I tried out for the tennis team, and the tennis coach basically said the same thing that I thought all along. I was too short, and he said tennis players were all going to be over 6 feet in a few years, and he was right. And he said, you also have a great slice backhand. You also are really quick on the court. You really are more of a squash player. At the time, I thought squash was a vegetable. And he said, no, actually, squash is an amazing sport. It's played in four walls, and we have 9 courts inside Penn Gym. So why don't you go check it out? And I'll set you up with the team. And the team members, who are almost all Americans, they taught me how to play squash, and I play squash to this day. So again, another low-profile sport that not too many people know about. And I also was racing sailboats when I was a kid, and continued to race sailboats after I got out of college. So I ended up being a pro sailor at one time, racing 100-foot boats. And I was also a pro squash player when I first got out of college, and ended up being a national champ in squash when I was 30. So I did a lot of really cool things in the sports arena. But after I got out of college, what I was really doing was running an investment practice. And I started off with PaineWebber, which is a company that became UBS in the 90s. And I did that for 10 years at UBS, or PaineWebber, and then did it again for another 12 years after that. And all the time I was doing tech portfolios, because I started when I was a kid coding. And I loved coding, but hated coding. I think everybody does. And it was one of those things that you do in order to make something happen on a computer. And so I did, and I loved doing it. So when I got out of college and got into business, it only made sense that I would continue that technology background, and had a bunch of good experiences with tech. I was involved in the beginning of cell phones. I'm that old. And in the beginning of the web, which happened in basically the 90s when it became public. So I had a lot of experience in tech portfolios. And I was also, in the early 2000s, I was coaching a fencing team, really just volunteering because they had one in my town, and at the high school. And I was also teaching my kids how to play soccer through their youth soccer league. I was also coaching their soccer team, and was also still one of the top fencers in my age group, or I'm sorry, squash players in my age group. So I had this vision sitting at my desk actually while I was working on my computer, that I was reaching out to the cloud, which in retrospect was the web. And I reached out to this cloud and I grabbed the fencing swords for the fencing team out of the left of the cloud. Right in front, I grabbed the soccer cleats for my kids for their soccer league. And then I reached out to the right to grab the registration materials for the nationals in squash. And I sort of came to, and I said, what I was really doing was reaching out into the web, because that web has made the world so much smaller. The fencing swords were coming from overseas, and the squash shoes were coming from Nike and Adidas, and the registration materials were coming from the city, New York City, because that's where the U.S. squash was. So I was reaching all over the place for these things, and they were coming right through my laptop. So I realized that was probably what was going to happen, and I saw communications. People were communicating on the web through their. At that point, it was just through their computers. But I also saw that they were buying stuff, that they were getting all the information they needed to become good squash players and tennis players and soccer players. And I realized that also they were connecting with the governing bodies and the teams and the leagues and everything else that they needed right through their computers. And at that point, really not much was happening with their phones. I mean, the phones really were still just texting and communicating. People didn't have smartphones for the most part at that time. And certainly there wasn't broadband. There was 5% of us in the United States back at that time had broadband, so they didn't have any video. And that's really amazing. You think about how that's transformed. Back then, they were sending out DVDs by mail to people, and Blockbuster, you'd have Blockbuster, and you'd go buy the DVDs. Other than that, you were just watching, the 4 channels of TV. And at that point, things were starting to happen on cable TV. And that was really important, because all of a sudden people had experiences with other sports they hadn't seen before. And that was also, I like to think that we're the modern day version of the wide world of sports. Back in the 70s, 60s and 70s, there was this program called The Wide World of Sports. It was on ABC, and it was really great, because you would see a sport that you never, every Saturday you tune in, you'd see a sport you never saw before. There was Scottish stump throwing and axe throwing, all kinds of wild sports you never could even imagine. And that included things that we see now in the Olympics. You see curling, you see fencing, you see other stuff that no one ever saw before. And that was every Saturday you tune into the Wide World of Sports. It was supposed to be only for one summer season, when some other program sort of blew up and they couldn't do it. So they asked this guy, Jim McKay, to be the producer of that. It ended up being 37 seasons. So it became a really big thing. And they had every sport you could think of that was either crazy or normal. And they would teach you what tennis is about right next to squash, right next to badminton, right next to fencing and curling and other sports. And what happened in the early 2000s, when you had NBC, but you also had MSNBC and CNBC, and they would play other sports that weren't considered by NBC primetime. So fencing showed up there, and that's what curling showed up. And NBC basically was bringing out these other sports on these other channels that nobody saw before. But the dynamic was amazing. When they first showed fencing on the Olympics, which I think was 2004, the sport went from about 100,000 people to 1.5 million people in the 3 years afterwards. Same thing happened with curling. No one knew what curling was. And it was basically shuffleboard on ice when you get down to it, with these big stones. And people saw it on MSNBC, and that was 2006. And the sport exploded. And now there are curling clubs in Florida, California, all over the nation. And they didn't exist before. And so we found that there was a market and a community for these sports, and you just didn't know about it. And to me, that all coalesced in 2003, 2004, when I had that vision. And then I realized that this could really, really be possible. And so I priced what it would cost to build a site that would put all these things together into one thing. And they said, well, yeah, we could do it, but you're really going to have a tough time with the video because nobody has broadband yet. So that's sort of a waste. And people have texting on the phones, but that's about it there. And it's going to cost you $50 million.
Mm.
So I was thinking, well, I can't really afford 50 million bucks, but I can start doing the low hanging fruit at the time. And I had to really make a decision at the time because I really believed in it. I really saw that vision crystal clear. And I said, okay, what am I going to do? So I went for the low hanging fruit. I opened a retail and institutional sporting goods shop called Total Equips and started that in Oyster Bay, Long Island, and started doing that. Took a couple $100,000 of my own and built this shop, and it started working. It actually grew very quickly from nothing to about 600,000 in revenue. And I knew all along that this is low hanging fruit for an eventual website that I was going to build. So it worked, and I was successful. And that went along for about 6 or 7 years. And then as the internet started catching up with my premise and my whole vision, I said, okay, now the next step is to build something online that I could use for the community and for groups. And that was called Zeus. And we spelled it ZOOSSE. And that was really built as a team and league management system. So got into that, and we built it. And unfortunately, or fortunately in retrospect, there were a couple of other companies that were doing that had a lot more money than I had that they were throwing at this challenge. And a company called Blue Sombrero, and there are a couple others that came along that were doing that also and had figured out the same as I was figuring it out, how to do that, how to build a scheduling system, a client management system, and the other components of that, which is basically building a hierarchy of organizations within each other. So you have, for example, let's say you're taking softball. So you have softball, you have USA softball, and then under that, you have the softball league that's in your area. So under that, you have a bunch of different teams, but you also have one group that's the administrators, another group that's the coaches, and then the other group that's the players. So you had to have those sort of interlocking while still having individual teams. So you had to go through all that kind of a thought process and development of that hierarchy. And then you had to have a schedule. And then you had to have the individual members try out and get on teams and then pay their dues and go along with how that process goes through the season, and then the finals, and the playoffs and the finals, and then the season ends, and you hand out trophies, and the season's over, you start over the next year. So that was Zeus, and then we worked on the very first time we did something like a community management system. It was called We Athletes, but that wasn't a good name, so we changed it to UBsports. And in 2014, we worked on the first beta. We bought the name from a big youth league down in Texas, and we started building it. And we went through 2 betas. The third beta was launched in 2017. 2020, we started really doing very well, but unfortunately, the system was built on an arcane technology called Ruby on Rails, which is an open source system, basically for academics. When they wanted to try coding using a package program, Ruby on Rails is one of the ones they used. But what happened was that it was very inefficient and started crashing every Friday afternoon. People would get off from work and they would start going into the system and go into their sports, and bang, the system would close down for the weekend. So then we were trying to chase our tails and get it relaunched. And I said, it was like now COVID just hit in 2020 and sports were dead. And we were thinking, oh God, sports might never come back, but it's going to be a while anyway. Let's close the site and retool and reopen. So 3 years later, that's where we are. We're in the middle of reopening. The site is open. The demo site is open as what they call an MVP, minimum viable product. And we're hoping in about 2 to 3 months to launch the real thing. So we had amazing success. We proved every part of our business model in the last beta. We proved the e-commerce part. We proved the communications part. We built an amazing group system that allows a group to be formed in between 20 and 30 minutes. And what's really cool is if, let's say it's that softball team, you can go to the softball portal. We build a portal for each one of the sports that we're covering. You can see that on UBsports. And in that portal, You have the news, you have blogs, you have vlogs, you have the rules, you have videos that teach you how to play with the rules, within the rules, and then they teach you the skills and drills that you need in order to get good. And then we sell you the sporting goods and equipment and apparel to play your sport. And then it connects you with the local team and league so you can join a team and actually play that sport. So it did everything all within that one package. And again, then it started crashing, but we proved everything we needed to do. So this time we're launching, and we have a lot of systems that are built in here that are patentable, that are proprietary. And the video system in particular is going to be really world-class and cutting edge. So really excited about all that. And that's what gets me up in the morning. And now we're working on the last bit of funding, the last bunch of funds. I put in about $1 million of my own over these years, building the technology and the system and the knowledge that we need and the connections that we need in order to make this happen. So we're launching. We've launched the seed round, and we're still filling a friends and family round at a valuation of about $12 million. And we believe that's probably going to be worth 30 times people's money they invest now and they get to 5 years from now. So that's our story.
Very cool. No, that's a great story. I like it. I got all the twists and turns and everything. And so would you say, just so I'm understanding correctly, it's an all-in-one youth sports platform? Is that you actually
it covers all athletes and all ages, and their parents too. When you have a youth, you have a kid like me. I came home from school and I said, "Hey, Ma, I want to be a fencer. I want to do fencing." And her first thing was, "Well, you want to build fences? You want to make gates and posts and fences?" Like, no. There's this thing with swords that you wear white outfits and you run around chasing each other with the swords. And she was like, "That sounds really cool. I didn't know that was called fencing, but that's great." There are a lot of parents whose kids go through the same thing. They come home and they go, "Hey, I want to learn how to play lacrosse. I saw it at school and it's really cool." And the kid's 12. For the next 6 years, 8 years, a parent is going to be their coach. They're going to be running them around on teams. They're going to be taking them to travel leagues. They're going to take them to showcases. They're going to try to get them recruited to college. There's a lot of parts in there where mom and dad, or whoever is their custodian and guardian, they got to take care of these kids from the time they decide to play a sport to the time they either get to college, get recruited, wherever they go. And so you got to take care of them too. And there are the coaches, there are the trainers, there are the fitness instructors. And esports is totally separate, but it's the same premise where you have a bunch of kids who want to play sports. Now there are coaches, there are online coaches and real-time coaches for esports. And there are leagues and teams, and these people are playing all over the nation, all over the world. And as I said before, there are now scholarships to college for esports. So it's become very inclusive. It's wonderful because they're finding that esports has this other side where it allows a kid who isn't very socially adept, could have autism, could have other social disabilities or challenges, and when they're online, when they're doing esports, somehow it allows them to build this alter ego and to sort of break out of their shell that they have in real life, which is really, really cool. I love that premise. But the other part of back to UBsports, we're inclusive as far as we're covering all competitive sports, all wellness systems, and we're also bringing in the trainers, the athletic trainers. Athletic trainers are special because they're medically trained. They're the ones who do triage when someone breaks a leg, has a concussion, hurts their spine, like we saw last year, or we actually see all the time, or have a heart attack on the field. And like they have to run onto the field and then resuscitate the person or just fix their leg or whatever. It takes 6 months, a year, gets them back on the field. So that's a special kind of trainer. They're medically trained, and they need a system that basically does the same thing as Zeus did way back. They are taking care of their clients. They're putting clients into their system. They're scheduling them for their meetings with them at the trainer's room, and then they're rehabbing them. They're using their technology and other people's technology and systems to heal them and get them back on the field. So it's another part of the community that needs to be taken care of. And each sport has its hierarchy. It has the Olympians and the pros, which we bring in to basically curate the experience for everybody. So I'll grab an Olympic athlete or a pro athlete, let's say a squash player. I'll grab squash player. We have actually two pro squash players on UBsports, and they curate the whole experience for everybody coming up. So that goes from youth all the way up to adults to masters to people old like me still competing. So you've got, obviously you need the rules, you need blogs, you need all the other resources really that fit for everybody. And that's
Mm-hmm.
what's really cool is once you figure out what category of resource you need, you could take a football player, cross out football, put in fencer. They basically need the same thing. They need the
Mm-hmm.
equipment. You need the news. You need the blogs. You need vlogs, skills, and drills. You need to learn how to hit a backhand or a forehand, or you need to learn how to lunge in fencing. You still need these skills and drills. Then you need conditioning, and then you want to actually enjoy the fun fails and flops videos, and you want to have community. You want to be able to find people around you to train with and to learn with, and then people in the greater nation. If I'm a cyclist, for example, and I'm going to be spending a couple of weeks out in LA, I want to be able to find a club out there where I can jump on a bike and ride for a couple of weeks out there.
Mm-hmm.
So there are a lot of reasons why people need to connect with their community, both locally and nationwide and then worldwide. And that's what we do on UB Sports. So it's about as concise as I can get
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm just curious what the alternative is currently, right? I think about it,
it. Google.
Google, yeah, and it's just piecemeal. Like, go sign up for a league here for football or whatever it is. Go watch videos on YouTube. Go to Dick's Sporting Goods, and so this is just kind of allocating it all into one place, and it's just convenience and for the athlete and the parent.
If somebody wants to see how hard it is for someone who's playing a lower profile sport, take volleyball. Volleyball, there are 40 million people in the United States. That's more than 10% of the population of the United States is playing volleyball on a regular
Mm-hmm.
basis.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got 40 million people playing volleyball, and you can't find a volleyball shoe in Dick's. You can't find
Mm.
a volleyball shoe anyplace, and they all need them. So what do? They're going on back on Google. They're back on you going on Amazon looking for shoes, and that's really basically the only thing you can do. So
Gotcha.
if you go to UB Sports, you're going to find volleyball shoes made by the best manufacturers. You're going to find volleyball everything else, basically the equipment they need, the clothes they wear. You can get a uniform on UB Sports, but also you're also going to find your local community for volleyball. So all this
Mm-hmm.
stuff, and of course the news and blogs and vlogs and everything else you need to learn how to play. You can go to the skills and drills videos and whatever sport. There are 100 sports there.
So you say volleyball is a low profile sport, but 40 million people play it, which is a big chunk of the population. I mean, so what's the hierarchy of youth sports in America? I would assume, soccer's up there, basketball, football. Like what's the most popular youth sport in America? Maybe we start there.
Uh, Currently, there are two that, are, as far as youth sports go, are the most popular, and that would be soccer.
Mm-hmm.
And volleyball's right up there. Volleyball, there's over 25 million kids who are playing volleyball. And then comes basketball. Basketball is like number 3 out of there. And then you get down to baseball. There are only about 14 million people playing baseball in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And there are about 11 or 12 million playing football. Football's obviously got another challenge right now in that parents don't want their kids to get hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And football is one of the most likely sports to get hurt in. Soccer's like probably the second most dangerous sport when it comes to that kind of stuff because of concussions. Kids go up to do headers, and they actually get more concussions than football does on a per capita basis. But in football, you have all the contact injuries that you don't really have other sports.
In soccer, the concussion is coming from heading the ball, or is that
Yeah, mostly.
typically? Oh,
I know, heading each other. Two
heading
kids
each
go up
other.
for right. Two kids go up for a header, and they hit each other, and you actually hear it from the sidelines, which is scary.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
yeah, and they're not wearing helmets, so that's head on head, bone on bone.
Yeah,
So
and
yeah,
you may not have the expertise on this, but I'm always curious too because you hear about all the. I mean, you think about NFL players and just the prolonged damage they do to their brains, and CTE is a big topic, and it sounds like you're pretty connected to youth sports, and there's like a pretty far out theory out there is that fewer people are going to play football, which means fewer people coming into the NFL, which will hurt the NFL. You extend it out 20, 30 years. I mean, do you see that happening, or do you think the NFL is relatively safe? I just think about it as, probably the most popular professional league in the U.S. So kind of curious.
Well, the Patriots just played overseas.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the interesting things is that football is starting to spread out around the world. I think people are still a little enamored of what's going on here in the United States. So baseball is very big in Asia, massive in Asia, and football started getting overseas. Basketball is already a worldwide sport. There are hundreds of millions of people who are playing basketball all around the world. So the American sports are being played over there, but the international sports are seeping into the United States. This year, they had the first Padel tournament, Padel, and that's an interesting sport. They're played with these round paddles, or not necessarily round, but the sort of oblong, and they're very thick paddles. The ball is basically a deflated tennis ball, and you're played on a court that can be any kind of surface, but it's surrounded by glass walls. And
Hmm.
the ball has to land on the floor first, and then it bounces off the walls if you don't cut it off, and then you can play it off the walls. So in a lot of ways, it bridges a bunch of different sports. It's like tennis, it's like platform tennis, it's like squash, and then you can play it off the wall, and it's got a net, so it is sort of like pickleball, like tennis, like other sports that have nets. So it's a very interesting international sport. It's very popular in the Latin countries, very popular in Portugal and Spain, and in England, and it's just started coming to America the past couple of
Hmm.
years. And it's a 50-year-old sport. It's as old as pickleball. Now, pickleball is a different animal altogether, but right now what we're seeing is that is pretty much in the United States. It's starting to spread over to Belgium and other countries overseas. And pickleball's exploded. I don't know if you know much about pickleball,
Yeah.
but it went from about 2 million people 5 years ago to 40 million people this year. And it's great because it bridges a lot of capabilities, people with different ages, and it's not a terribly athletic sport in doubles. It is in singles, but in doubles, it can be played by pretty much anybody. There are 17-year-olds playing with 70-year-olds, and it's pretty much an equalizing game where it comes down to a lot of technique, touch, and strategy, as opposed to raw athleticism. So
Hmm.
it's really interesting. The top players in both the men's and women's games in the top 10 or 20 are a bunch of kids who are 17, and they're playing against adults who are in their 40s. So
Yeah.
it's really a very equalizing sport, but it's fun. I mean, it's a massively fun sport. There was an article in the Times, and there are always articles in the Times about it these days, and that's because it's in a lot of cities, and the people in the cities are being driven crazy by pickleball. It's taken over tennis courts. It's taken over parkland because all you really need to do is have a temporary net and some chalk to draw lines, and you're off to the races. The
Hmm.
ball is a wiffle ball, and that's like $3. And then the pickleball paddle starts at like $10, goes up to a couple $100 when you get really good. So
So
basically, anybody can play it. Yeah, sorry.
yeah, yeah. I was just gonna ask you a little more about pickleball because I remember I played it way back when I was in junior high school, and right, you just said it's grown so massively. I mean, as someone who's trying to grow sports and grow, I guess, a sports platform, I mean, do you look at that as an example, or what caused that massive growth? Was it marketing, and then, like you said, so many people can play it, or was it organic? What happened with pickleball?
Okay, so the thing about pickleball is that it started as a couple of old guys playing with their families on a tennis court. They took the net, and actually, no, I take it back. It was on a badminton court, and they were playing over this taller net. We had that. They said we have nothing around, so they grabbed uh, regular table tennis paddles and a wiffle ball they had lying around, and they started hitting with it. And the the way they got pickleball as the name is that this family's dog was named Pickle. and pickle
Mhm.
just keep chasing the ball, so it was called pickleball. And
Huh.
so yeah, it started 50 years ago, and it was just a family, and then it started spreading out, and then it became a little more technologically advanced. They got actual pickleball paddles, but it was really an old folks game played in adult living centers,
Mm.
and it was being played in more and more and more centers around the nation. And then when the families of these older people went to hang out with grandpa and grandma, they ended up playing pickleball. That's some of the families said, "This is really cool." They took it out to the high schools and everything, and it became something that a lot of people started doing. And then it just the curve went like this, right up about 5 years ago, went from 2 million people to 40 million people. So what happened, I think, was that it was realized as a great game for everybody to come together and have fun. And if you can say, as they said in the Times, there were two problems with it. One, it was taking over courts, and two, well, three problems. The second part was that the noise that a
Mhm.
pickleball has when it bounces off a pickleball paddle is sort of obnoxious. It's just
Yeah.
clack, 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 clack. And it drives people in the neighborhoods crazy. And
Mhm.
the other part about it, though, is that there's all this laughing going on. There's always kibitzing going on when people are playing pickleball. They're always saying, "Oh, it's in, out, whatever," but they start goofing on each other and that kind of stuff. And especially after you get done playing, everyone's laughing, and so it's a very social event, not just a very harsh experience. If you're doing speed skating, you're done with speed skating. That's it. And what they find with pickleball is that people just have a great time. They hang out afterwards. It's a big social event. And so I think the combination of the technique, and as you get better, it becomes nuance. And again, it becomes a more athletic event the better you get.
Mhm.
But also, it's that camaraderie that you have, especially now. It's still amazing that there are 40 million people playing it. And when a beginner, like I was a year ago, walked onto the court, I said, "Hey, I want to learn how to play this wacky sport." I just showed up. Actually, my girlfriend's sister plays it like every day, and her brother-in-law. And when we were down there, we visited. This is how it happens: you go down, you visit, you start playing, and you go, "This is really cool." You bring that back to
Mhm.
where you are. You find a community around you. You find pickleball courts. Next thing you know, I find out there are 30 free outside pickleball courts within 5 miles of me.
Yeah.
And then we start going to these different communities, and every one of them just accepted us and took us from beginner to intermediate to pretty good players. So
No,
that's the best part of it. I think it's a very welcoming experience when you take up that sport. So
no, I
it
think
has so
that's
many things
cool.
going for it. It's really
Yeah.
cool. It really is.
It's crazy. Yeah, it's all over the place. It's going viral. I'm curious, kind of in the same vein, what sport would you say is not getting enough attention, or I think you do have a focus on profile sports, or what's a sport that you want to grow through UBsports and get more kids playing it or more people playing it in general?
I take the Olympics as the model. The Olympics has over 60 sports that are being played during the Summer Olympics and the Winter Olympics. And if you look at the sports that are played, they're sports that you don't really see that often. Fencing, again, you have curling. In the winter, you have bobsled and all these sliding sports, they call them. And they have snowboarding and skiing, which are still not that. They're being played, but you only see them a couple times a year on TV.
Hmm.
So I think it's very easy to say I'm going to make sure that fencing is well represented there. I think badminton is a sport that very big overseas, it's a professional sport overseas, and nobody knows that it's played here by 7 million people. You never would know it.
Hmm.
Same thing with volleyball. Volleyball still needs its place in the sun, even though 40 million people play it. They're mostly played at boys and girls clubs, at YMCA's, AAU, and in high schools and colleges. And still, it's a lower profile sport. People don't see it. You never see it on TV except for beach volleyball. And again, at the Olympics, I think the Olympics give you a great springboard for all these other sports. So I see the Olympic sports as a great place to try to pick sports from there. But also, I think the international sports, as they sneak into the United States, cricket just had its first professional season 4 months ago, 5 months ago. And
Hmm.
cricket's a really interesting sport. Nobody knows how it's played in the United States, except for people who came from India and Pakistan and Europe and the EU and the UK, because that's where it's played. In the Caribbean, it's played a lot. It's played in India. It's actually the second biggest sport played around the world. Something like
Yeah.
3 billion people watch it, and about half a million play it, or a billion play it. And it's played basically like baseball, except when you throw the ball, you don't throw it straight at the target zone, the strike zone. You throw it off the ground, and
Hmm.
there's a pad in between the pitcher, or it's called the bowler, and the guy who's swinging the bat. And the bat is sort of a flat bat that you swing at the ball that's going to bounce off the ground as it comes back up. And they have wickets that are behind the batter that the batter has to protect. So even if the batter doesn't hit a fair ball, they can't let that ball hit the wicket or they're out.
Yeah.
Whole different kind of
Yeah.
rule, because they're also, the fielders are all around the batter. So if the ball bounces up and out behind him, it can still be caught and be out. So again, it's a bunch of different rules, but it's really fun. And actually, it's a very old sport. It was played back in the United States. Actually, Ben Franklin and George Washington played it,
Hmm.
and then it died out when baseball came along, and now it's starting to seep back into the United States. But that's a great sport to look at, because as our population becomes more international, it only makes sense that those sports from overseas would follow them into the United States. And that's basically how soccer became a popular sport here in the United States as well. But it had a big head start.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's interesting, and like you said, they don't get a lot of publicity. And I'm kind of thinking through this, right? And I think it makes sense that you can't necessarily play cricket on a main TV network because I don't know, is there an audience there? Is there enough money for advertisers? But I'm also thinking through this, and I'm wondering, with the rise of the internet, right? Like I really don't watch cable TV anymore, only really for sports. I mean, do you see these streaming being an answer to getting more publicity to whatever it is, to cricket, to fencing, to squash, or how do
Yeah.
you raise visibility for these sports?
Well, we are also. It's called. Those smart apps that you find on smart TVs. You see
Hmm.
where you watch YouTube on
Yeah,
smart TV, right? It's just
yeah.
an icon on it, and you click it, opens up YouTube. Well, we're planning on doing UBTV, and that's,
Mm.
they call it an OTT, over the top system, and you can buy one of those and set them up. Only costs a couple $1,000s to do that, but we will be also having an OTT system. And when you go onto UBTV, you're going to be able to click onto cricket and onto fencing and watch on demand, and also watch
Mm.
live those sports. So yeah, we'll be doing a lot of that. That's really important for me, because I think, well, obviously video's the way to be social these days. Everything's
Hmm.
social on, from Snapchat, TikTok, Instagram, even on Facebook. Everything's video.
Yeah,
And I think it's the same thing. People just want to watch videos. So I think that's a trend that is wonderful, and it's here to stay, and certainly is something that's going to keep growing. So our plan is to coalesce all these populations for each one of the sports, and then take those all those videos that we can grab and put them on UBTV, so people can experience whatever sport they're interested in. And really, what's really cool is if you can say, you're looking at the most watched sport on a Friday afternoon, and it happens to be cricket, or it happens to be curling, and you never saw it before, and
hmm,
it's right there, and there's like basically the same thing as YouTube. That first top left corner is just sort of the most watched video or sponsored video. If we did
yeah,
that for the most popular video that's being played, no matter what sport, and you're looking at it, you're going, I have no idea what that is over there. And you click it, it opens up a whole world that you never knew about, and then a whole new community of different athletes playing a whole new sport. So to me, it's a brilliant premise, and it's a great way to
yeah.
build a community around all sports.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about the premise, or kind of like why you've ended up here, and you're doing what you did. You're doing what you're doing, and you're back to your story when you were a kid. I mean, is this kind of what you wish you had as a kid, to give you more visibility into all these
Yeah.
different things you could have tried? And just kind of curious if that's what drives you.
Oh yeah, definitely. Because you didn't. When I was a kid, I was again sailing, fencing, playing tennis. Tennis you saw 3 times a year during the majors. and Wimbledon, then Roland Garros, and then the U.S. Open. So Aussie Open really wasn't there yet, but sailing you never saw on TV. You might see maybe 10 seconds of it on the sports news on one of the primetime channels during the America's Cup, and that happened every 3 or 4 years.
Hmm.
And that's actually one of the oldest trophies in the world is the America's Cup, and that's a sailing worldwide competition that happens every 3 years. But again, people don't know about sailing too much, even though most of us, our forebears, got here by sailing,
Yeah.
on sailboats, right? So my great grandparents came here by sailing, and my grandfather was up in Nova Scotia and Newfoundland building sailboats, and that's a whole different story. I won't go there, but the idea is that these lower profile sports was something that I played, and I never only when I went to regattas in sailing, tournaments in fencing, and tournaments in tennis. I didn't know any other people around me who were doing those sports except for
Hmm.
on the teams, and I knew there must be a bigger community. And so I started fencing when I was 12. I didn't even know there was an organizing body called US Fencing until I was 17, when I started going to these regional tournaments. And all of a sudden, US Fencing goes, "Hey, you're really good, and here's some techniques you should use." Some of the really greatest fencers at the time said, "Here, this is the way you should do this. This is the way you should do that. It might help you get better." But I didn't know they existed. I didn't know US Fencing existed. And if a kid can learn from the best in the world when they started, they're going to get better a lot faster than they would otherwise, right? So if I have at the top of my community for fencing, I have one of the best fencers in the world being able to reach down to a 10-year-old and 11-year-old and their parents.
Hmm.
That gives us kids such a big springboard toward how they can get better faster. And then US Fencing, who has trouble reaching down to a 10 or 11-year-old to even tell them that fencing exists, like me. And how did I know? I just happened to walk by the fencing room. And if US Fencing could have some kind of a platform to get down to that 10-year-old, they're going to have a head start teaching this kid and watching this kid. And then when they get to be elite level, to grab them and put them on the US team. So for
Yeah.
them, it's a great um, platform for them to, or a business model, even a marketing business model to get down to these kids and to their
Yeah.
parents.
100%. Right. That's the beauty of the internet, right? Is you can learn from the
It's
best. You
it
can
makes
learn
it
so much more.
right.
Yeah.
And instead of needing a lot of money to make this happen, marketing and advertisers, all that kind of stuff, you can have an organic system that actually
Hmm.
does the same thing for free. So if I put up a video on TikTok or on Instagram, and it basically introduces anybody who happens to watch UB Sports, the UB Sports channel on Instagram or TikTok, and they say this wacky sport they never saw before. At the bottom it says, click here to go to UB Sports, and they go there, and all of a sudden that whole population's right there, and
Hmm.
they're learning a new sport.
Yeah.
So, what could be better than to take a kid who never knew about fencing and get them to take those next 8 years and become an Olympic fencer? You basically
Yeah.
changed their life. Now there are some organizations that reach into the inner cities, into other populations, take kids who never knew about a sport and get them to that level. I'm very proud that squash is one of those sports. They reach into the inner cities, and New York City, for example, there's City Squash and Street Squash. There are two organizations. They belong to the Squash Education Association, and they're taking kids in the inner city. The kid at 11 or 12 has to sign up. Their parents have to be on board, and they say, "Okay, um, we're going to allow this kid who's in the inner city. Who knows what's going to happen if they're in their inner city? Unfortunately, they could go the wrong way, end up
Hmm.
being addicted to drugs. They could be killed by fentanyl or whatever, or they could just end up in gangs and have a horrible life, or they could work their way out of the city, out of the inner city. The SEA reaches into this inner city, grabs these kids who will commit, and the parents say, "Okay, yes, we'll commit with him." They take them after school, and these kids, the odds are they're not even going to graduate from high school. They end up getting high school educations. They're they have an hour and a half of tutoring, hour and a half of work on the squash court. So 3 hours total after school. They commit 4 or 5 days a week, and the kids end up getting A averages. They end up getting full rides to prep schools, and then they go to any college they want because they've now not only learned how to study and how to have A averages, but they also are playing a sport that's being played in the Ivy League and in the big colleges. So
Yeah.
it's the most amazing turnaround story you could possibly ever ask for. And these guys do it on a regular basis. Their average of getting kids out of the inner city and graduating from high school and into productive careers is 90%. That
No,
is
that's
unheard of.
amazing.
It's absolutely
Yeah.
amazing. So if I want, if I ever get depressed, I'm thinking, I don't know if I can make this happen. I look at those kids and I'm thinking, I got to
Hmm.
make this happen because this is
Yeah.
brilliant. It's wonderful. It's great for the community, and it's great for these lower profile sports. But it's also great for these millions of people who have no other way to connect to their sports and learn these sports.
Yeah, 100%. And I- my next question is kind of in line with that. Maybe it's not an inner city kid, right? And you've been telling your story, and sports have been such a big part of your life. Maybe to just a normal parent out there, a normal kid that's saying, I don't know if sports are for me, or what's the point? I'm just going to play basketball and that'll be it. I mean, what is the value of sports? I mean, isn't there more to it than just having fun or just going to play basketball or just fencing? Like, if you think about it from your perspective in your life, what else does it teach you?
Oh, it's a great question. It's sort of a loaded question because I think in business and in the world, we've seen that the people who learn how to commit, how to sacrifice some parts of their lives for other parts of their lives, and set goals, and then find a route to get to that goal, usually are pretty successful. And if nothing else, they've learned how to commit and sacrifice. So
Hmm.
if you say I'm gonna be an Olympic athlete, and you're working for 10 years to get onto the Olympic team, but you don't make it, it stinks for you because it would have been great to be an Olympic athlete, but you've learned how to commit, you've learned how to sacrifice, you've learned how to put other parts of the easier parts of your life aside to work on something really hard to try to attain goals. If you're an employer and you're looking for somebody who can do that, can say, I'm not going to be a mush and go out drinking every night and not really look for some kind of success route. If this person looks like they can do that already, and you're looking for people who are going to push the envelope and get better and be successful, and they can get into your business and they can help make your business successful, I'm going to hire that person over a person who never had goals and really didn't succeed in sports.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of Olympic athletes, a lot of high school athletes, a lot of college athletes who had the same thing. They said, I'm going to go for it. I'm going to see how far I can go. And even if they didn't get to be an Olympic or a pro athlete, they still work toward those goals. So I suggest that every person should be really trying to find a goal. And even if it's like, I'm going to get healthier, I'm going to be more fit, I'm going to lose those 20 pounds that I couldn't lose for 10 years, I'm going to work on doing that. That's a great goal. And it also helps you in other parts of your life that you don't even realize.
Hmm.
So sports, I think, are a very, I guess you can call it differently, a melting pot or a challenge, and that's sort of a road to that. But you were starting to talk about something different when you first started that question, and your question was going towards what if you don't have those goals? You don't want to be an Olympic athlete. You don't want to be a pro. There are other people who are sort of challenged in a bunch of different ways. It could be socially challenged. It could be physically challenged. It could be you came home from the army or the navy or wherever, and you've lost a limb, and you're wondering how you're a wounded warrior. How are you going to get on with your life? What's your life going to look like after you've gotten injured? What's it going to look like if you hurt your back and you can't stand? What about what about my future? How am I going to get there? One of the great outlets they found and recovery vehicles they found for people who have gotten these challenges and these disabilities is sports. There's
Hmm.
wheelchair sports. There's sled hockey. There are other sports that you can play, And they found that one of the greatest ways to recover from your injuries and wounds and disabilities is through sports. So again, sports is an amazing vehicle for your life to
Yeah.
become more comfortable within your life, within your community, and with finding a future and finding goals and using those goals as a reason for being. And I hate to say it, but one of the most horrible things is a person who comes back from a war and they've gotten injured, they've lost a limb, they've lost friends on the battlefield, and they come back and all they're I hate to say it, but they're considered second class, third class citizen, and really they're the ones who are sacrificing themselves for our liberty.
Yep.
And I think being that we just had Veterans Day, I think people don't realize. I was thanking people when I saw they were veterans over the weekend. I was like, thank you, thank you, thank you, because they really did sacrifice for our being here and for our safety. So,
Hmm.
and then when you see someone who comes back from that and made a bigger sacrifice and lost a limb and or lost their family back home while they're away, and these people really need the support that we can give them. So if we can
Yeah.
be a part of that, that's why we're really very involved in with the Wounded Warriors and the wheelchair athletes, and those. I think if we can help them, it'd be fantastic. So we're also very inclusive, not only for the people with disabilities like that, but also social disabilities. As we were talking before about people with autism and how they find their place in esports, and also you have people from underrepresented communities. You have the LGBTQ plus community. You have people who grew up in the inner cities. Again, talking about the SEA and squash. By the way, there are a lot of sports that are doing that right now. Fencing does the same thing in the inner city, and a bunch of other sports are reaching into those communities to help those out. But also, you have the other side of the story is people in rural communities. Their high school might
Hmm.
only have 5 sports. How do they find
Hmm.
out about these other sports? Crew, or fencing or lacrosse or these other sports they have no idea about, but still they're very popular sports. Lacrosse right now is a very fast growing sport in high school and college, and as is rugby. Rugby is also a very popular sport that's growing. Um, and what you find also is that there are two routes from learning how to play to becoming one of the top athletes in the nation or the world in sports. There's the extracurricular route that you find with gymnastics, for example. That's been pushed out of schools because basically the liabilities. Some
Hmm.
kids can really get hurt in gymnastics. So a lot of schools have pushed that out and they've tried to replace it with other sports. But unfortunately, gymnastics has gone that extracurricular route, while lacrosse and triathlon have become curricular routes, scholastic routes to have better levels. So there are two routes for that. So there's the intricacy of sports is immense. There's so much going on. To start off with, there are 100 sports that are competitive. And then you have
Yeah.
about 20 or 25 wellness activities. And then you have esports. Esports, there are hundreds of thousands of games, but about 25 are the ones that are played as regular esports all around the world. So what else can I tell you?
Well, I'm curious about esports because I think that's a hot topic. And am I correct in saying that esports is the biggest sport in the world, or is that not accurate? I thought I heard
That's
that
not
somewhere.
accurate. That's
No,
really
but
not
it.
accurate. There are only about, believe it or not, esports playing competitively is only about a quarter of a billion people, 250 million people. And there are multiples more playing soccer and multiples more
Mm,
playing cricket and
okay.
multiples more playing other sports. But that being said, everybody's got an Xbox or PlayStation. And if not, they have their phones. And so it's not video games as much as esports. Esports are the ones that are played as an organized sport. There's money involved. There's competitions. There are, Twitch and Discord basically are a few sports, Fortnite and a bunch of others. But that's what you'll watch on the big broadcasts like that.
What is the
Uh,
number one game competitive esport game currently? Do you know off the top of your
I
head?
think League of Legends still is up there, but I think Fortnite's up there. There are about 4 or 5 other sports the esports that are being played at that level. So, but there are hundreds of millions of people who are playing that. What's interesting is that these people are popular online. They have tens of millions of people following them. The big ones, they have
Hmm.
millions and millions of people following, and
Yeah.
they're all watching these people play on Discord, on Twitch, on other platforms. So
But
we also are going to be taking care of esports as well, because there are now besides the fact that there are college scholarships for esports, which is still, I have trouble contemplating, but it makes great sense for people who just aren't physically capable of playing sports and just don't have that kind of mentality or that eye-hand coordination.
what do you? I'm just curious too, because I think esports, and I think it's great that it's an outlet for some people, but it's also like I view it as okay, you're playing video games competitively. Why not get out there, get outside, and play a more traditional sport? I mean, do you have any thoughts on that? Of like, you have a kid and they say, "Oh, I want to be an esports athlete," versus a traditional sport, and in which way you should steer your kid, maybe as a parent.
Uh, there are all kinds of studies done from all different sides of that question, and they all come out the same: is that you're a better thinker when you're physically active. So if you want to be a great esports competitor, they tell you to go out and go walking, go riding, go do something else,
Mm.
and then come back. Do that first thing in the morning or before you go and compete. Because when you do these other sports, you're stimulating your brain and you're getting your body to work with your mind, or vice versa. So even though, yeah, I want to be a great Fortnite player, it's really important that I get out and do something and get my body going. And it does a lot of stuff as far as your brain goes. So yeah, you want to be a great esports athlete, you still got to get out and play the sports and do something,
Hmm.
stay active.
Hmm.
In fact, there has been, unfortunately, in the United States, a big push toward taking sports and activity out of schools.
Hmm.
Why? Well,
Really?
basically, yeah, big time. And my buddy Jim Baugh is the ex CEO of Wilson Sports, and he's running an organization, and he's also working on um, a bill in Congress called the Fit Bill, Fit America Bill, and his organization is Fit America, PHIT America. And that's basically changing that whole premise. If you think about the U.S. in particular, we're the fattest nation. We're the least in shape nation in the world. And the reason we are is because we've pushed physical activity out of our daily regime. And when I was a kid, we after school we did our homework, and then we immediately went out, jumped on our bikes, and hung out with our neighborhood friends. And we just went around and played sports, and played, stick hockey. We played all kinds, stick baseball. We played all kinds of stuff. Soccer in the street. We went and grabbed a soccer ball. We played lacrosse after school, and we just did that kind of stuff because we wanted to be active. And
Hmm.
even tag. I mean, all the stupid stuff we did when we were kids is still physical activity. So it doesn't have to be very structured, but it still has to be active. That stuff has been squeezed out of the schools. So now Fit America is changing that course. And they've already had 850,000 kids come through their program, where they're taking schools that are closing their sports activities and not making it a session in school. And they're saying, no, you got to do just the opposite. You got to bring the activity back into these kids so their minds work better and they learn better. And
What?
if nothing else, you burn off a little bit of energy, you're going to be able to sit at your desk longer. But really, it helps your mind get more stimulated and makes you a better thinker when you get to class.
What?
So it's critical. And UBsports and Fit America have signed an agreement when UBsports launches to work on the next 10 million kids and get them back out and back. Basically, it's a 1-2 punch. Fit America grabs the kids, gets them back on the fields and active, and we take those kids and give them sports. And
Very
they're
cool.
taught 4 or 5 sports through Fit America, and we say, yeah, this is how you play those sports. This is the governing body. These are the leagues and teams around you that play those sports. And by the way, there are 95 other sports that are out there that you can learn on UB Sports.
No, that's awesome.
So yeah, it's a great partnership.
What's the premise for removing sports from schools? Is it a funding issue? Is it a
Budget, number one.
yeah? Okay.
Number two, there have been some studies, and I disagree with these studies, by the way. And even if this quote unquote science is there, I'm still not buying it. So scientists out there, you can come and talk to me, because I don't think it's been scientifically proven. But what they are saying is that kids need to wake up later and they need to start school later. So if you're going to have a daylight time after school, especially in the winter, to play sports, you are either going to sacrifice time in find some courses that you can take out during the day, or you're going to push the whole session, those 6 hours of school per day, and make it later in the day. So if I used to start at 7:30, I'm starting at 9. All of a sudden, the end of school is at 4, not 3. So all of a sudden, especially now, we get dark at 4:45 here in New York. So all of a sudden, if I get out of school at 4, or let's say 3, I've got an hour and a half of play before it gets dark. And if I'm on a team and they have to travel to the neighboring school to play, that's an hour of getting there. So either I'm playing under the lights or I can't play. So unfortunately, this is really, that shift in time has really screwed up our sports systems in a lot of ways. So what do? They take sports out of school and they make that session in school shorter to try to be able to accommodate what has to happen after school. And one of the things that they can lose, well, the two things that are losing, number one, because of time, and two, because of budget, is arts and physical activity. So all of a sudden, you don't have gym and you don't have arts. So, I'm not going to bang on the arts drum. There are a lot of people doing that. And I would be, if I weren't doing sports, I would be banging on the arts drum too, because that's horrible. I think there's, people who are just artistic and they want to be in that community. So, but what I've concentrated on, because of my background, is sports, and so that's my thing. But I think interestingly, the same thing that what UBsports does, you're taking all these different communities, even if you're taking people from all over the world in all different communities, and they want to play a sport like squash. Basically, they come from all different communities, all different demographics, and they're playing one sport. There's one organizing body, and they're learning the same rules, and they're learning how to play. There's a right way and a wrong way to learn, and on UBsports, they can learn the right way, which is great. But that also can go for other walks of life. Music, for example, there are a bunch of different instruments. There are 50 or 60 instruments that are played mainstream. And if you go play on an orchestra or you're playing on a band, you're playing an instrument. And there are millions of people around the world who are playing the same instrument who know the right way to play, and there are wrong ways to play the instruments. But there's the best way to play that instrument. So you can have basically the same thing with UBsports, with UB Music, where you bring all these different instruments together and the different communities together. And again, they need the same thing. They need an instrument. They need music. They need to play a band or an orchestra to play on. And so you basically have the same kind of dynamic as you would with UBsports. But again, I'm with sports.
Yeah, maybe that's in the future, right? Once you corner the sports market, you can move into music.
It could be. I got my work cut out for me for the next 5 years, though. So we'll see what happens.
100%. So you mentioned this really early in the interview, and I've been wanting to ask you, and maybe we can kind of end with this point and this question. I believe you mentioned that you were a pro squash player, and then I go back to when you're talking about the commitment and sacrifice just being an athlete takes, or playing a sport takes. Can you kind of speak to what it takes to take it all the way to the extreme in your chosen sport and become professional, like kind of through your experience and what it took for you to get to that level?
Sure. Squash is a great example. It's a microcosm of what you have to do. I took up squash late in life, relatively speaking. I took it up when I was 18 because I was a tennis player. And so I already had a racket sports background, but squash is a totally different swing. It's a totally different kind of sport. You're playing in four walls. You're playing against a wall instead of over a net. And the lines basically are the floor and the walls. And on the front wall, there's what they call a tin. It's made out of metal. And it acts as a net. In tennis, you sort of have to hit over it. And if you hit below it, it makes this sound that's very tinny, hence the name, tin.
Mm-hmm.
And so you got to play within that, and then there are outlines all around the court. So that's basically it. And then go for it. And then you basically just hit softballs, hard shots, lobs, drop shots, all that kind of stuff. You have to learn how to play each one of these shots. So you have to commit. And especially I started late, so I had to commit really hard on this sport. So I was playing between 5 and 7 before work, or before school. And when I was in school, I was playing year round. I was playing during the summer. I was playing 4 or 5 hours a day. I was teaching other people during when I wasn't coaching, and I would pick up games. I would just be at the club, and I would take up anyone walks on the court. Here, let's play. And it could be a beginner, intermediate, advanced, pro. I would play with them. And so my endurance built. There's a lot of endurance you need for squash. So my endurance built up, my shots got better, and I just kept playing harder and harder and rising in levels to the point where I was graduating from college, and I was one of the best in the nation. Our team was fourth in the nation in college when I graduated, so that was pretty cool. And so I just became a pro, teaching pro, and then I tried on the pro circuit, which didn't last long, honestly. It lasted about 6 months, and I was getting my butt kicked by not only American players, but international players. Because at that time, it wasn't still an international population in the United States. Basically, it was American kids who had learned from their parents or from their prep schools. And so I picked it up late, and I was competing against kids who'd been playing 15 years longer than I had. So I really didn't stand a chance as a pro. And then when the international competition came along, I was cannon fodder. So I stayed as a pro, but I was also then getting into my real career. But when I was around 30, and I said, I'm running out of time to really be great at squash and really make my name. So I started playing a lot again. And I was sort of a lonely guy at the time. And so I was playing in the morning from 5 to 7, went to work in the investment world on Wall Street from 7 to 5, got done at 5, went right to the squash courts, played from 5:30 to whenever they kicked me out. And so I was playing 6, 7 hours a day during the week. And then during the weekend, I was playing up to 8 or 9 hours a day. So I got better and better and better. I started winning tournaments and played a lot of tournaments all over the nation, and ended up being national champion when I was 31, 32. So commitment's massive. And so my career was basically, the hard way, but it taught me, that commitment and that sacrifice was obvious. I was lonely. I was working, full time, and then I was sacrificing all that other time I could be socializing and all other stuff I could do. And instead I was headlong on making something of my squash career.
And is that what it takes, would you say, in general, to be a professional athlete? Before work, after work, weekends? I mean, it's work,
Absolutely.
school, and sport, and then that's your life.
Absolutely. And if you do get sponsored, if you end up being on a college team and then get picked up by even like a Sandlot or a AAA team or a semi-pro team, and they can pay your way around, that's great. Do that and see how far you can go if that's your bent, because that only happens once in your life, twice if you're lucky. I was very lucky with squash. I got really good, and I was able to do that for a little bit. But also on sailing, I had been sailing all my life, and I started sailing bigger and bigger and progressively larger boats. By the time I was again in my 30s, I was sailing all the time. So during the summer, I would be sailing a lot, and ended up sailing on very large boats and sailing all over the East Coast and in the islands, and racing on very large boats, 100-foot boats that cost millions of dollars, and they spent millions of dollars on their programs. So I was a pro sailor. They would pay for me to go to different tournaments or different regattas and race on these massive boats. So that was amazingly fun, and it was a great opportunity. But I was still in the middle of doing my investment business. So there's, unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know. I guess unfortunately, I was sailing as a bowman, which is on the bow of the boat. You're the person who is on the front of the boat, on the pointy end of the boat, and you are making sure the sails go up well, go down well, and you're taking care of all that kind of really hard technical work. If someone has to go up the mast, it's usually you. And we're talking about 100, 150-foot mast in the middle of the ocean, which is the scariest thing I've done. But it was, of great experience. Hope I can tell my grandchildren about that someday. But it was, really a fun time. But it was also, I was paid and I was having a great time, but it was a big commitment. And there came a point where we had won the national regattas for the Maxis, and we were doing great. And Maxis are boats that are over 70 feet, up to about, ours was the largest boat, which is with Matador 2. And it was run by a guy named Bill Koch. He was the guy who was sponsoring this. He put millions and millions of dollars into that. In fact, he also ran an America's Cup campaign. But came to the point where they had to go to the Worlds, and it was in Sardinia. And I had to give up 2 months of my investment practice. And I'm thinking, well, this is what's paying my way, and what's going to happen after sailing in these Worlds? I'm going to come back and I won't have a practice. I'll have to start all over. I really couldn't take the time. Oh, so I thought, actually, to go to Sardinia. They went to Sardinia. My friends went to Sardinia. My crewmates went to Sardinia. They won the Worlds. And most of them are professional sailors now. So I guess I had to make a fork in the road, and I decided toward business instead of doing sailing. So, but that, talk about sacrifice. That was, I would either sacrifice my business and go one way, didn't know how it was going to work out, or stay with my business and keep going that way. And I took, the right fork.
Yeah, no, that's crazy. Looking back on it, right, the decision. But I mean, hindsight always, is 2020. But no, that's really interesting, and I think it ties it all really together really well, right? Because now you're creating the platform, so hopefully young people, kids can have that same experience as you and get into that sport that they love early. And that kind of the theme I got from you being a professional is, hey, it takes a lot of time and a lot of commitment. And I'd say, right, the sooner you can start sailing all the time or playing squash all the time, the better you'll get as you continue to work at it, right? So
100%. That's one of the important parts, is that you have the experience and you see what you can do, and you can pick goals that are different from the regular top 5 sports. And if you pick one of those goals, you have to find a way to get there. And if UB Sports ends up supporting those kids who are starting off at 10 or 11, and help the parents support the kids and help the parents bring them to where they have to go, and they can learn and grow from that way, I think it's fantastic. Number one, for the kids, but two, I think for the families. I think it's one of the things that's really lost these days, is that family influence. And if this is one of the things that can bring the family back together and give mom and dad an opportunity to be with these kids as they're learning sports, there's a challenge, of course, because the parents are saying, you should be a pro athlete. I'm going to throw you into the sport. You got to play every day, all that kind of stuff. So there's that other, you're living through your kids and trying to make your kids pros, when 90% of them aren't going to make it. 95, 99% of them aren't going to make it. But still, these parents are forcing these kids to, professionalize, and they don't want to professionalize. So you also have to help the parents chill and make sure the kids are still growing up whole and healthy and happy. And you don't want to slam the sports down their throats if that's not their walk in life. That's really very few people's walk in life when you get down to the end of it.
Yeah, no, that's a really good call out, I think, right? Commitment, but also balance too, and don't force anything. Cool. Hey, Greg, well, thanks again for joining me this morning. I think we can kind of close here, but to that point, for all those families, athletes, kids out there, where can they find out more about you and UB Sports?
Well, great. I'm Greg Burton on LinkedIn. You can find UB Sports Live on all the social media, the UB Sports channel on YouTube, and you can always reach out to me, Greg at UBsports.com. I'd be glad to talk to anybody who's on your show and wants to learn more. Glad to help them out.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thanks again, Greg, for taking the time. I'll put any links, all your contact info in the description. And hey, I wish you the best of luck. You have a great mission. I think you're going to do great things. So thank you.
Thanks, Connor. I think the same for you. If you keep going this path, it's going to be great for you as well. So I'm glad I can help you out too.